Welcome back to Back Road Creeps. Settle in, get comfortable, and let these stories carry you somewhere quiet. Every story here is made for one purpose, to help you drift off and fall asleep. No jump scares, just slow, dark, and cozy storytelling right before bed. If you enjoy what I do here, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment letting me know where you're from. I love seeing where you all are from. I don't run any ads on this channel. Not a single one. These videos are completely free for you, and I want to keep it that way. If you'd ever like to support me financially, I have a Patreon. The link is pinned in the comments and in the description below. Even the smallest support means everything and keeps this channel alive. Now, get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let's walk. My divorce finalized in September, and I took a kayaking trip like 3 weeks after that. I know how that sounds. I'm not going to get into the divorce part except to say I needed to be somewhere I couldn't get a phone signal. And that was the reasoning, that was all of it. The inlet is up the coast, maybe 4 hours north of here. It's one of those places that doesn't get tourists because there's no easy put-in, and the water is cold enough to kill you in about 20 minutes if you go over and don't get out. I'd done a shorter version of the route twice before, once with a friend from work and once with my ex, actually 2 summers before everything went sideways. So I knew what I was getting into. I had the right gear. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was being reckless, because I wasn't. I had a dry suit and a radio, and I'd filed a float plan with a guy I know who lives near the trailhead. His name is Gordon. He's nobody, just a guy I know who agreed to call the Coast Guard if I didn't check in by the 8th day. I put in on a Tuesday. The first 2 days were fine. I mean, they were hard. The paddling is hard up there because the currents do what they want and you're constantly adjusting. But nothing happened that I would call unusual. I was camping on beaches, just gravel bars mostly, above the tide line. You pull the kayak up, and you find a flat spot, and you sleep. That's the whole thing. There's nobody out there. There were no other boats those first 2 days, not even commercial traffic, which can happen depending on the weather and the time of year. The first thing I noticed was on the 3rd day. I pulled up to a spot I'd noted on my map, kind of a cove with a gravel beach and some flat mossy ground above the waterline. It looked empty. It looked like it always looks up there, which is untouched, which is the whole point. But when I dropped my dry bag and started looking for a place to put the tent, I found this indentation in the moss. Not a small one, the size of a person lying down. And it was warm. Not body temperature warm, but warmer than the moss around it. Like the difference between a chair someone just stood up from versus a chair that's been empty all day. I put my hand on it, and it was just slightly warmer. I checked for an explanation. I looked up through the trees to see if there was a gap where sunlight could have hit that spot. There wasn't really. It had also been raining most of the day. I set my tent up somewhere else on the beach. I told myself an animal had been sleeping there. A deer or something. I don't know what animals are up in that area, honestly. I'm not a wildlife person. But that was the story I gave myself, and I moved on. The 4th morning I found a tin on the rocks. Sardine tin, the flat rectangular kind with the pull tab. It was open and it had been rinsed out or eaten clean. And it wasn't rusted. And it had been raining for 2 days by then. Iron rusts fast when it's wet, I know that much, and this tin looked like it had been there maybe a few hours, not days. I looked up and down the beach. I walked the tree line. There was nothing. No fire ring, no other garbage, no marks in the gravel that I could read as footprints, though gravel doesn't hold prints well anyway. I put the tin in my trash bag, because that's what you do, and I paddled out. I want to be clear about something. The inlet is not a place people go. It's not a secret, exactly, but it's also not somewhere you end up by accident. You have to want to be there. You have to have a boat, and the right gear, and you have to know the route. I'm not saying it's impossible that someone else was out there. I'm saying I hadn't seen another boat. The cigarette was the 3rd day after that, so the 6th day overall. I want to say that correctly because the timing matters, or at least I think it does when I try to put this together later. I came around a point in the early evening, and I was looking for a place to stop because the wind was picking up, and I was tired, and I'd been on the water for about 6 hours. And there was a beach, another gravel bar, and it looked good, enough flat ground, protected from the wind by a bluff on the north side. I pulled up. I dragged the kayak above the tide line, and I'm standing there in my dry suit, and I smell cigarette smoke. Not faint. Not like maybe this is something carried on the wind from somewhere. Immediate and close, the way you smell it when someone is smoking next to you. I looked everywhere. I walked the whole beach. I went into the trees a little, not far, because the brush is thick up there, and also I had this feeling of not wanting to go further in, which I can't explain except to say that it was there. And then I found the cigarette. It was lying on top of a flat rock at the edge of the trees, and it had been smoked almost all the way down, and it was still giving off a little smoke. Not a lot, just the last bit of heat working its way out. I touched the coal end, and it was hot. I stood there for a while. I don't know how long. Then I got back in the kayak and paddled another 40 minutes until I found somewhere else to stop, and I set up in the dark, which I'd been trying to avoid doing, because setting up a tent in the dark on an unfamiliar beach is how you end up sleeping on a rock or too close to the tide. But I did it anyway. The next day I started paddling longer in the mornings and stopping later in the evenings. I was trying to cover more distance. I don't know exactly what I was trying to do. I think I was trying to put space between myself and whatever the pattern was. The warm spot and the tin and the cigarette, that was a pattern, and I wanted to get out ahead of it. I didn't tell Gordon any of this when I checked in on the radio that night, because I didn't know how to say it in a way that would sound like anything other than I'm not handling the solitude well, which maybe was what it was. The weather turned on the 8th night. I know it was the 8th because that was the day I was supposed to check in with Gordon for the last time before the end of the trip. I checked in and told him I was on schedule and I'd be at the takeout in 2 days. Then the wind came up, and it came up fast. I was already camped, but I hadn't tied the kayak as high as I should have because the tide charts said I had plenty of clearance. I went back down in the dark and rain and dragged it up another 20 feet and tied it off to a root. I could hear the water moving differently below the point, that sound it makes when the surface is getting broken up, and I could smell kelp, not fresh kelp but rotting kelp, which means stuff is getting turned over in the shallows. I got back in the tent, and I lay there, and I listened to the wind, which was loud enough that I wouldn't have heard anything outside even if there was something to hear. I fell asleep. I didn't mean to. I woke up around midnight, I know because I looked at my watch. I needed air in the tent. The condensation was bad. I unzipped the tent. My kayak was not where I'd tied it. I want to be careful about this part, because I know what it sounds like. I was disoriented. It was dark. The rain had stopped, but the wind was still going, and my headlamp batteries were getting low, so the light wasn't great. So when I say it wasn't where I'd tied it, I'm accounting for the fact that maybe I wasn't seeing clearly. I looked for maybe 2 minutes from the tent door, not finding it, before I got my boots on and went out. It was about 15 feet to the left of where I'd tied it. It was facing inland. Not sideways, not at an angle. Facing directly away from the water. My paddle, which I'd left clipped to the cockpit bungees, had been taken off the bungees and laid across the cockpit horizontally. The tie-off rope was still knotted. It had been unknotted and roped again. I looked at the root I'd tied it to. The knot was the same kind of knot I use, which is just a cleat hitch, nothing complicated. It doesn't come loose on its own. The kayak doesn't move on its own on flat ground with no water under it. I stood there looking at it, and then I turned my headlamp to the ground around the tent. And there were footprints. Not fresh, not like someone had been there 60 seconds ago, but recent, not rained out. They went around the tent in a loop. Not one pass, multiple. The loop overlapped itself, like whoever made them had gone around more than once. The prints were boot prints, something with a lug sole. My boots have a lug sole. These were not my boot prints. I know where I'd walked that night, and I know my own stride, and these were not mine. I didn't sleep after that. I sat inside the tent with the zipper pulled, and I waited for it to get light. When it was light enough, I packed everything as fast as I could, and I got in the water, and I paddled. I paddled for 11 hours with one stop to eat, and I made the takeout a day early. Gordon wasn't there. I hadn't told him I was coming early, so I pulled the kayak up and sat on it, and waited for about 2 hours until he drove by on the logging road and saw my truck and stopped. I didn't tell him everything. I told him I'd had some trouble with the weather, which was true, and that I'd cut it short. He helped me load the kayak, and I drove home. I've tried to think about who would be out there with no boat, because there's no road access to those beaches, most of them. The ones that have any road access are hours of hiking from the nearest trailhead, and you'd have to know exactly where you were going. I've tried to think about whether there's a way someone follows a kayak up a coast without being seen. Whether there are routes I don't know about. Whether there's some explanation that fits all of it, the warm moss, the tin, the cigarette, and then the kayak and the footprints. I don't have one that fits all of it. I have things that could explain some of it, separately. Together I don't have anything. I haven't been back. I'm not saying I won't. I'm just saying I haven't. The trip was supposed to be about clearing my head, And I guess it did that in the sense that I came home thinking about something other than the divorce. I don't know if that's what I needed or not. I haven't really figured that part out. My son was 9 that summer, and his mother had started seeing somebody, and he basically stopped talking. Not completely, but close enough that I noticed it at the dinner table, and I noticed it in the car, and I figured I needed to do something with him that wasn't just sitting in my apartment watching him not talk. So I took him camping. That's the whole reason we were there. I want you to understand that before anything else, because otherwise none of it makes sense. The campground was outside a town called Elk Bend in central Idaho. You probably don't know it. I barely knew it. I'd been there once when I was in my 20s with some guys from work, and I remembered it being quiet, and I remembered there being fish in the river, and I figured quiet and fish were probably what we needed. It was a small place. 6 sites along a narrow river, pit toilets, no hookups, no camp host. You paid with an envelope and a drop box at the entrance. No cell service once you got about 2 miles down the access road. I knew that going in, and I didn't think much of it because we were going to fish and sit by a fire, and I had a paper book and I didn't need my phone for any of that. We got there on a Thursday afternoon in early July. My son's name is Marcus. He's mine. I should have said that. He's my kid. He was 9 then, and he didn't say much the whole drive up, which was about 4 hours, but he did okay with the tent, and he seemed interested in the river, which was narrow and fast and cold, and had these flat stones on the bottom that caught the light. He spent most of that first afternoon just picking up rocks and dropping them in. Not skipping them, just dropping them straight in and watching them disappear. I was at the picnic table with a spinning reel that had gotten knotted somewhere inside itself, and I was working at it with a piece of wire and drinking coffee I'd bought at a gas station 2 hours back, and it was already cold and bad, but I drank it anyway. The campground had 2 other groups when we got there. A retired couple in a big trailer at the far end, Site 6, and 2 younger guys, college age maybe, with a tent and a lot of gear at Site 2. Both setups looked like they'd been there at least a day already. Nobody came over to say anything, and I didn't go over either. That's normal. That's how campgrounds work. It was maybe an hour before dusk when the van came through. White cargo van. The older style, boxy, no windows in the back section. I noticed it because there was no reason for it to come in. The campground was full. We were at 5, the trailer was at 6, the 2 guys were at 2, and sites 1, 3, and 4 were all taken by them too. A family had come in around 3. So the place was at capacity, and there was a board at the entrance that you were supposed to flip to show full, and I didn't know if someone had flipped it, but either way the van came in slow down the loop road and went all the way around without stopping. No front plate. The driver had his window down and his left hand up near the top of the wheel. He didn't look over at us when he went past. Or if he did, I didn't catch it. I just noticed the van was moving slowly. Slower than you'd move if you were looking for a spot and realized the place was full. He went back out the entrance road. I went back to the reel. He came back through maybe 20 minutes later. Same speed. Same route. All the way around the loop and back out. I watched him that time. He didn't stop, didn't slow down more than he already was, didn't look at any of the sights that I could tell. Just went around and left again. I want to tell you about Marcus here, because it's the thing I keep coming back to. Both times the van came through, my son stopped moving. He was in the river up to his ankles, which I'd told him was fine as long as he didn't go deeper. And when the van was going past, he just went still. Both times. Hands at his sides, shoulders pulled up. He wasn't watching the van. He was looking down at the water. But he wasn't moving, and he wasn't doing the thing he'd been doing with the rocks. He just stood there until it was gone, and then he went back to what he was doing. I didn't say anything to him about it, because I didn't know what I would have said. The van came back a 3rd time while I was starting dinner. I had one of those little propane burners, and I was doing kinchili, and it takes forever, and I was watching the pot when I heard the engine and looked up. Same thing. Same loop. He went past our site, and I got a better look at the driver this time. White guy, maybe 50, wearing a light-colored shirt. That's all I really got. He had both hands on the wheel by then, not just one. He went back out. I thought about going to talk to the guys at Site 2. I don't know what I would have said. Something like, "Hey, did you see that van? Did that seem weird to you?" But by the time I thought it through, it seemed like maybe I was making it into something. And also I didn't know those guys, and starting a conversation with, "Hey, does something seem wrong?" felt like a lot. After dinner, Marcus and I sat by the fire, and I tried to get him talking. I asked him about school starting up, whether he was nervous about fourth grade, and he said not really. I asked if he wanted to fish in the morning, and he said yeah. We sat there until about 9:30, and then I told him we should get in the tent. I woke up because I was cold. The fire had burned out, and the temperature had dropped more than I expected, and my sleeping bag wasn't rated for it. I don't know what time it was. I reached for my phone, and the screen said 12:41. I was on my side, and I looked over to check on Marcus, and his bag was empty. I got my boots on without tying them, and unzipped the tent, and called his name. Not loud. I don't know why not loud. I said Marcus, and then I said his name again a little louder, and then I saw him. He was about 15 feet away, standing at the edge of the bank. In his socks. He'd left his shoes in the tent. He was facing the river, but he was looking up the slope on the far side, into the trees, and I came over and put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Hey." And he turned and looked at me and said, "I heard something." I said, "What did you hear?" And he said, "Tapping." I didn't know what that meant. I said, "Were you sleepwalking?" And he said no. He said he'd woken up and heard tapping, and I asked him from where, and he pointed, and that's when I looked up and saw the van. It was parked on the loop road above our site, not where it had been before. Before, when I'd watched it go out the third time, it had gone back out the entrance road, and I'd assumed it left. But it was there now, nose pointing toward the entrance, engine off, lights off, maybe 50 feet from our tent. I took Marcus by the arm and walked him back to the tent, and I told him to get in his sleeping bag. I don't remember if I said anything else to him. I tied my boots. I had a flashlight in my bag and a hatchet I always bring car camping, and I got both of them, and I stood outside the tent. The van wasn't moving. I couldn't see the windshield from where I was standing because of the angle and the dark. I stood there for a while, long enough that my eyes adjusted and I could see the shape of it better. No lights on inside that I could see. No movement. And then it started. Tapping. From the back of the van, behind those rear doors. Not hard. Not like someone panicking or trying to get out. Slow and light. Like maybe someone testing how much sound it made. Or testing whether anyone would respond. I want to be clear that I am a reasonably calm person in situations. I'm not saying that to make myself sound good. I'm saying it because what I did next I've thought about, and I don't think it was stupid even though I know how it sounds. I walked up toward the van with the flashlight on. I got to about 30 feet and stopped. The tapping stopped when I turned the flashlight on. I stood there. I moved the flashlight across the back doors and then to the driver's side and then back. The windows on the back doors were small and high up and dark. I couldn't see anything through them. I waited and there was no more tapping and the van didn't move. I stood there for I think 4 or 5 minutes and nothing happened. Then I went back to the tent and I got Marcus and his sleeping bag and my sleeping bag and I put both of us in the car. I locked it. I left the headlights off. I sat in the driver's seat and watched the van in the side mirror, and Marcus was in the back seat, and after a while he went back to sleep. I don't know how, but he did. About an hour later, maybe a little more, the van's engine started. I sat up. It pulled forward slow, went the rest of the way around the loop, and went out the entrance road. I watched the glow of the taillights until I couldn't see them anymore. I stayed in the car until it got light. Then I went and packed everything up. Marcus helped me break down the tent without me asking him to. He rolled up both sleeping bags. We were out of there before anyone else at the campground was awake. I drove until I had cell service, and I pulled over, and I thought about calling somebody. The sheriff's office, I guess. But I didn't know what county we were in exactly, and I didn't know what I would say. A van parked near our campsite. Somebody tapping inside it. Neither of those things is a crime that I know of. I don't know if they're anything. I put my phone back in the cup holder and kept driving. I looked up Elk Bend a few times in the months after. I don't know what I was looking for. There was nothing I found. Marcus didn't talk about it. I didn't bring it up with him because I wasn't sure how to bring it up, and also because I wasn't sure what had actually happened. He's older now. 15. Sometimes I think I should ask him what he remembers from that trip, and I haven't done it yet. The thing I keep thinking about is that the van parked on the road above us and not in the lot, not down by the other sites. Above our site specifically. And I don't know if that means anything, or if I'm finding something in it that isn't there. I don't know why it came back after dark. I don't know who was tapping, or whether it was meant for us to hear, or whether we were just close enough to hear it by accident. I don't have a way to end this, because there isn't an ending. That's just where it stops. We drove home and Marcus started talking a little more after that. Not a lot, but some. I don't know if the trip helped or if it would have happened anyway. My name's Darren, and I was doing pipeline inspection work up north in 2009, and I want to tell you something that happened on that job because I have been thinking about it again, and I think I need to just say it out loud to somebody. The company put 4 of us out in the field for 6 days. Canvas tents beside a logging road, maybe 2 hours from the nearest town if you were driving fast. It was seasonal work, nothing unusual about the setup. I had done that kind of thing before. You go out, you do your checks along the line, you come back to camp, you sleep, you do it again. The pay was decent, and I needed the money. The other 3 guys. Carl I knew a little from a previous job. He was big, he talked a lot, he snored in a way that I genuinely could not understand how his body produced that sound. The other 2 were Mitch, and a guy we all called Reno because nobody could pronounce his last name, and he didn't correct us. I didn't know Mitch or Reno before that job. You get to know people fast in a situation like that, because there is nothing else to do in the evenings. The first 2 nights were miserable because of the rain. Not cold enough to snow, but cold enough that you could not get warm. The rain came down hard enough that the sides of the tent would press in when a gust hit, and you would wake up with canvas touching your face. Carl snored through all of it. Somebody's socks were always hanging near the propane heater, because one of us was always trying to dry out from the day before. That was just how it was. Normal miserable field work. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that by the 3rd night I was already not sleeping well. That matters for later. 3rd night. And I want to be careful here because I have told parts of this before, and I always start getting things out of order. I woke up around 2:30. I know the time because I looked at my watch right after it happened. That was the first thing I did. What woke me up was the ground moving. Not shaking like an earthquake, not rolling. 2 impacts. One, and then almost immediately another one. Like something very heavy had come down twice in quick succession. The kind of thing you feel in your chest more than here. I lay there for maybe 5 seconds trying to figure out if I had dreamed it. I had not dreamed it. From outside the tent I heard one of the guys, I think it was Reno, make a sound. Not yelling exactly. More like someone who just said hey out loud to themselves because something surprised them. That kind of sound. I sat up. I found one boot. I could not find the other one, and I stopped looking because I heard Reno again, and this time it sounded more urgent. I unzipped the flap, and I stepped out into the rain with one boot on, and one foot in a wool sock that was soaked through in about 2 seconds. Reno was standing near the edge of the light from our floodlight. He had his back to me. He was just standing there looking at the tree line. I looked at the tree line. Here is where I have trouble because I have tried to describe this to myself many times, and I cannot get it right, so I am going to tell you what I actually saw, and you can do with it what you want. Something was moving in the trees just past where the floodlight reached. Moving fast. The way I knew it was there was by the branches. There is a specific way a large animal moves through brush. The branches go in a direction and at a speed that tells you the size and speed of what is pushing them. I have been around moose my whole life. I grew up in an area where you saw moose regularly, and you learned to read those signs. This was not that. The branches were snapping 30 or 40 feet at a time. Left to right, moving along the tree line, which meant it was moving along the edge of our camp rather than away from us or toward us. Circling. That is the only word I have for it. It was circling us. It was moving too fast. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Whatever was moving through those trees was covering ground faster than anything I could account for. Not running fast. Just wrong fast, like the distance between the sounds did not match what I expected from the time between them. Carl came out of his tent. I do not know what woke him up. He stood next to me, and he started saying moose. He said it several times. He kept saying it over the next few minutes. I understand why he said it, because you want an explanation, and moose is an explanation. I grew up around moose. That is all I will say. Mitch was up by then too. Somebody grabbed the floodlight and started swinging it along the tree line. It was one of those big portable ones on a handle, the kind you can aim. I do not remember who was holding it. You could still hear the path of the thing in the woods, even after there was nothing to see. That is the part that I think about. The sound kept moving even when the branches stopped. A weight sound, low and intermittent, like ground pressure, moving through the trees in the same left-to-right direction. And then it stopped. The light swung back across the tree line once more and caught something. I want to be precise about this. It caught the edge of something. Part of it. It was low to the ground, lower than I expected given the sound. and the fur was black and plastered down from the rain the way fur looks when it is completely soaked. The shoulders were high. That is the thing. The shoulders were very high relative to the body, moving in a way that I do not have a good reference for, a rolling motion. And then it was out of the light. I do not know if it moved out of the light or if the light moved off it. It happened fast. And then it stopped. Whatever it was, it stopped moving. Completely stopped. I want to be clear about what happened to the sound in camp at that point. It is not that everything went quiet in some dramatic way. It is that I became aware that I could only hear the water coming off the tarps. The rain had not stopped. The dripping had not stopped. But every other sound had, and I noticed it the way you notice something when it is gone. Carl had stopped saying moose. Nobody was moving. The floodlight was still. I was not looking at the tree line anymore. I do not remember deciding to stop looking at it, but at some point I was looking at the fuel drums instead. We had them stacked at the back edge of camp. I was looking at them for no reason that I can explain. From somewhere behind the fuel drums, something exhaled. Once through its nose. A single breath. Low. Not loud. The kind of sound that you hear and you know exactly what made it. You know it's a nose, you know it's one breath, and you know it is close. None of us moved. I'm going to tell you what happened next, and then I am done. We stood there for a long time. I do not know how long. Eventually Carl said something, and we all started talking at once, and somebody went inside for the spare light, and we lit up the whole edge of camp. We walked over to the fuel drums. Mitch wanted to walk the perimeter, and the rest of us said no, and he agreed. We checked what we could check from where we were standing. The ground behind the fuel drums was soft enough to take a print. There were marks. I am not going to tell you what they looked like because I looked at them for a few seconds, and then I stopped looking at them, and I have not described them to anyone. I am not being dramatic about this. I just decided I did not want to have that image in my head any more than I already did. Carl took a picture on his phone. I do not know if he still has it or what he did with it. We did not sleep the rest of that night. In the morning we did our work and did not talk about it. That night and the 2 nights after nothing happened. We packed up and drove out on day 6, and I rode the whole way back listening to whatever was on the radio. I have looked up animals. I have looked up a lot of things over the years. Black bear is the obvious answer. Black bear moving fast, and the rain making everything weird. The rain doing something to the sound and the distance. I have tried that explanation on. It fits some of it. It does not fit the shoulders. It does not fit the speed. It does not fit what was behind the fuel drums. But I am not a biologist, and I was tired, and it was dark, and I am aware that people see things wrong all the time. The other guys have not talked about it, at least not to me. I ran into Reno maybe a year later at a different job site, and we talked for a while, and it didn't come up. I thought about bringing it up. I didn't. I don't know what Carl thinks happened. I don't have a way to reach Mitch. I think about it maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes more. It's not that it keeps me up or anything like that. I am not saying that. It's more like I'll be doing something, and my brain will go back to standing there in one boot in the freezing rain with the water coming off the tarps, and that one exhale from behind the fuel drums. Just that moment specifically. The specific quality of the sound, and where it came from, and how close it was. I do not have anything else to tell you about it. That is just what happened. My sister was the one who suggested the trip. That's where I should start probably, because otherwise none of the rest of it makes sense in terms of why I was even there. She called me maybe a week after I got discharged and said she had found this place, a campground about 3 hours north, and that she and her fiancé Marcus were going up for a long weekend, and did I want to come? He was at the time her fiancé, they're married now, he's fine, that's not relevant. My sister's name is Dana. She's 4 years older than me, and she has this way of framing things as suggestions that are actually just decisions she's already made. So she said, did I want to come? And I said, I don't know, and by that afternoon she had already texted me the packing list. This was early 2022. I had been in the hospital for about 3 weeks. Not for anything, it's not. It was a psychiatric hold that became a voluntary stay. I'm not going to get into that part. What matters is that I was out and I wasn't sleeping well, hadn't been sleeping well for a while, and Dana's thing was that fresh air would help me, quote, settle down. That's the word she used. Settle down. Like I was a dog in a car. The place she rented was one of those canvas tent setups. You've seen them. They look like something from a safari, big wall tent with a wood stove inside and actual beds, which is not camping in my opinion, but Dana called it camping so fine. It was next to a frozen lake. There were maybe 8 other occupied sites spread through the trees. You could see the little yellow lanterns people had hung outside their tents at night. It was the kind of campground that had a website with a lot of photos of couples holding mugs. The first night was fine. The second night was when I started noticing the dog. I wasn't sleeping. This was not unusual for me at that point. Dana and Marcus would go to bed around 10:30, and I would sit outside in the folding chair they'd brought and watch the snow blow across the lake. The moon was up most of those nights, and the lake's surface was open enough that you could see the wind moving across it. I don't know how long I sat out there the first night. A few hours probably. The dog came through at some point that first night, but I didn't think anything of it. Brown shepherd mix, medium-sized, 1 white paw on the front left. It came from the left side of the clearing, trotted across, went into the trees on the right. It was carrying something, looked like a work glove, the kind with the rubber grip on the palm. I figured it belonged to somebody at one of the other sites. Dogs get into things. I watched it go, and then I watched the lake for a while, and then I went inside and lay down without sleeping until it was light. The second night is when it became a thing. Not right away. It came through once and I clocked it, just because I was bored and I had my watch and I had nothing else to do. I noted the time. Wrote it in the Notes app on my phone, because I was curious whether it would come back. It came back 23 minutes later. Same direction, left to right, same pace, this time carrying what looked like a strip of cloth. Gray or white, hard to tell. I wrote down the time again. 23 minutes after that it came back. This time it had something else in its mouth, darker, smaller. I couldn't make it out clearly. I want to be clear about the 23 minutes, because I know how that sounds. I wasn't estimating. I was timing it on my watch, the actual second hand. The first return was 23 minutes and about 10 seconds. The second was 23 minutes and maybe 15. So not exactly 23 minutes, but close enough that I kept watching. It came through 4 more times that night. The intervals were all within about 30 seconds of 23 minutes. One of them I think was more like 22:40, something like that, so I'm not saying it was a clock. I'm saying it was consistent enough that I noticed. What it was carrying changed each time. The glove, then the cloth strip, then something dark and wet looking that I thought at first was a piece of clothing. Then I couldn't see clearly on the 4th pass, and on the 5th it had what looked like a stuffed animal. Like a child's stuffed rabbit, the kind that gets dragged around and loses its shape. It was dark, the fur, like it had been wet for a while and dried that way. None of that on its own is that strange. Dogs scavenge. They make patterns. There's probably an explanation for the interval that has to do with whatever loop it was walking, some path through the trees that I couldn't see, and 23 minutes is just how long that path took. In the morning I mentioned it at breakfast. Dana was making sausage on the camp stove, the little propane one, and she burned some of it and was scraping the pan when I brought it up. I said there was a dog coming through the clearing last night. Did you guys see a dog? Marcus said no. Dana said no. I said it was a brown shepherd with 1 white paw, and it came through a bunch of times during the night. They both said they hadn't seen it. Marcus said maybe it was a coyote. It wasn't a coyote. I've seen coyotes. This was a dog, medium-sized, the build of a shepherd, and it wasn't moving like a coyote moves. I don't know why that bothered me as much as it did. Them not having seen it. It shouldn't have. They were asleep. Of course they didn't see it. But it bothered me and I didn't push it. I just let it go and ate my breakfast, and we went for a walk around part of the lake that afternoon. Nobody at the other sites had a dog that I saw. I looked. I walked through the campground on the way back from the lake, took the long way, and I didn't see any dogs. No bulls outside any of the tents, no leashes, no dog waste bags hanging off anyone's gear. I didn't ask anyone. I thought about it and decided it would be a strange thing to ask. The third night I sat outside again, and I had my phone out from the beginning. I wrote down the time I sat down. I watched the left side of the clearing. It came through at the same time, relative to when I sat down, as it had the night before. Or close enough. I didn't have the exact times from the night before. I had written them, but I hadn't done the math, so I can't tell you it was the same absolute time. But it felt like the same part of the night. Dark, cold, the other sites mostly dark by then. Same route. Same pace. It had something in its mouth that first pass. The glove, I thought, though I wasn't certain. Then 23 minutes, and it came back with the cloth. I'm not saying it was definitely the same items. I'm saying that's what it looked like. I watched it come through 6 times that night. Timed every interval. 5 of them were between 22:50 and 23:20. One of them was just over 24 minutes, and I thought maybe the pattern had broken, and then the next one was 23 minutes after that. On the fourth pass it stopped. It had never stopped before. Both previous nights it had just moved through at that same trot, nose down, whatever it was carrying swinging a little, and gone into the trees. This time it stopped in the middle of the clearing. Just stopped and stood there. I was maybe 30 feet away. It turned its head and looked at me. I want to be careful about this part, because I know what I'm going to say, and I know how it sounds. Its mouth was empty. I am not saying it had dropped something. I'm saying when it turned its head, and I could see its mouth, there was nothing in it. And it had been carrying something on the approach. I had watched it come from the left. There had been something dark hanging from its mouth. And then it stopped, and its mouth was empty. I looked around the clearing. I didn't get up. I looked at the ground in the direction it had come from to see if something had been dropped. I couldn't see anything. The snow was bright enough under the moon that I think I would have seen something sitting on the surface, but I can't be certain. The dog looked at me for maybe 10 seconds. Then it turned and went into the trees on the right side. I sat there. I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting there, and then from inside the tent behind me I heard Dana's voice. She was talking to Marcus. I could hear the murmur of it, but not the words. And then her voice got a little louder, and she said something about my boots. She said something like, "Why are your boots wet if you haven't gone anywhere yet?" Or that was the shape of it. I'm not sure of the exact words. And I looked down at my boots. They were dry. They were the boots I was wearing sitting in the chair, the insulated ones. And they were dry because I had been sitting in the chair and hadn't walked anywhere since I put them on inside the tent. I don't know what boots Dana was talking about. I didn't go in and ask. I thought about it and I didn't. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. There are a lot of ways to explain the dog. Loops, patterns, it lived in the area. It was someone's dog from a site I hadn't checked. It was more than one dog, and I was just not seeing the differences in the dark. Any of those could be true. The mouth being empty could be that it dropped something, and I missed it. The intervals could be coincidence, or close enough to coincidence that I was just pattern matching, which is something I was apparently doing a lot of at that time, according to people who were paid to have opinions about it. All of that is probably true. I think most of it is probably true. What I don't have an explanation for is the boots. Not because it's impossible. I know there's an explanation. I know Dana probably just said something that I heard wrong, or she was talking about Marcus's boots, or she said something that wasn't about boots at all, and I was outside in the cold and not sleeping, and I processed it wrong. I know that. It's just that I had been sitting there for 2 hours. I hadn't gone anywhere, and my boots were right there, and I could see them, and they were dry. And she said what she said. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I didn't bring up the dog again. We drove home the next afternoon, and I slept in the car most of the way back, which Dana said was a good sign. And she was probably right. I did sleep better after that for a while. I looked up the campground a few months later. It's still there. They have new photos on the website. I looked at them for a while. I don't know what I was looking for. I still have the times in my notes app. I haven't deleted them. The intervals are right there. 23 minutes, or close enough. 7 entries. I don't know what the dog was doing. I don't know why it had those things in its mouth. I don't know where it went between passes, or where it came from. I don't know what Dana was talking about. That's all of it, I think. That's the whole thing. My wife was 8 months pregnant when we drove out there, so that's the part you have to know first. The trip was her idea. Not a camping idea exactly, more like she looked at the calendar and said we had 1 weekend left before everything changed, and she wanted to use it. She's the one who called her brother about the trailer. I didn't push back on any of it. We packed it in a day and left on a Friday. Her brother's trailer was one of those older ones, late 90s, the kind with the fake wood paneling inside and a propane burner that clicked 4 or 5 times before it lit. He'd had it sitting behind his house in Cottonwood for 2 years. He put new tires on it the week before we borrowed it and said everything worked. It mostly did. We went up through Prescott first because we'd been meaning to stop there for a while, and this felt like the last chance for something like that. We ate lunch, walked around. Nothing happened in Prescott. That's not what this is about, but we were there. That's the part one keep coming back to. The campground off County Road 18 was another 2 hours north and west. It's out past Ash Fork, past where the land flattens out and the trees get smaller and further apart. I'd looked it up online, and it had maybe 12 sites and a bathroom block, and that was it. No hookups except one or two with water. No camp store. The reviews said it was quiet, which was the point. We got there in the late afternoon. I want to say 4 o'clock, but I'm not sure. There were 2 other parties there when we pulled in. One was a retired couple in a big fifth wheel, the kind that costs as much as a house. I only talked to them once the whole weekend, just a wave on the first day. They kept to themselves. The other was a man camping alone about 3 sites down from us. Silver Tacoma, not new, and one of those rooftop tents that folds out on top of the cab. He had a camp chair set up and a small fire ring. He was sitting there when we pulled in, and he looked up when we drove past, but didn't wave or anything. The first thing my wife noticed about him was the gloves. Leather-work gloves. He had them on when we arrived, and they were on every time after that, all day, even when he was just sitting there with a coffee mug. Not rubber gloves, not gardening gloves. The kind you'd wear if you were moving heavy things or working with wire. She mentioned it that first evening, and I said maybe his hands were sensitive to cold, and she said it wasn't cold enough for that, and I said I didn't know then. Every morning, he would walk to the campground map. The map was posted on a wooden board near the entrance road, just a laminated sheet with the site numbers and the bathroom location, and a little arrow that said you are here. He would stand in front of it for a long time. Not like he was figuring something out. He always seemed to know where he was going before and after. He would just stand there looking at it. My wife clocked it both mornings, and so did I the second morning, and I didn't say anything about it because there wasn't anything to say about it. People do things at campgrounds that they probably don't do at home. That's sort of the point of going. He didn't talk to me at all until the last night. Before that, the only contact was nods. He would nod if we made eye contact. That was it. My wife started noticing that he turned up near the bathrooms. Not in a way that was provable. The bathrooms were just a cinder block building about 100 yards from our site, and she walked over there several times a day because she was 8 months pregnant, and that's just how it was. She said that maybe half the time she went, he was somewhere nearby. Not waiting outside. Not following her in any direction. Just in the general area. Coming from somewhere or going somewhere. She said it might be nothing. She was the one who said that. I didn't say it first. But she was also the one who was irritated when she came back the second afternoon. And she doesn't get irritated without a reason. She said he'd spoken to her. Asked if we were the couple from Flagstaff with the green Subaru. We were from Flagstaff. The Subaru was green. We still had the dealer sticker on the rear window from when I bought it the previous spring. One of those oval stickers with the dealership name on it. I said that's probably all it was. He saw the sticker and figured Flagstaff. And she said yeah, probably. She still seemed irritated. I didn't push on it. I thought about it later that evening while I was washing dishes in the little sink. We were parked at a slight angle, and through the window over the sink I could see 2 of the other sites. His was one of them. He was at his fire. The gloves were on. Flagstaff is an hour and a half from where we actually lived at the time. We were living in a rental in the south part of the city, not Flagstaff. The dealership was in Flagstaff because that's where I found the car I wanted at the price I wanted, and I drove up to get it. The sticker said the dealership name and city. It didn't say anything about us or where we were from. He'd assumed we were from Flagstaff because of the sticker, which made sense, except we weren't from Flagstaff. We just bought a car there once, and either he was wrong about us and meant some other couple, or he somehow had the right car but the wrong city, or he had something else and I wasn't sure what. I didn't say any of this to my wife. She'd already written it off, and she needed a quiet weekend, and I wasn't going to pull it back up. The second night the wind came up and pushed the smoke from all the fires sideways, low to the ground. I got up at 11 or so to use the bathroom myself. I didn't go inside yet. I stood outside the trailer for a minute. There's no good way to explain why. I just stood there. The campground was pretty dark. The retired couple's fifth wheel had one exterior light on, but everything else was out. I could see the Tacoma 3 sites down, and then I heard gravel. The sound of footsteps on gravel, slow, not like someone walking purposefully, but like someone moving carefully. I looked toward our car. The Subaru was parked in front of the trailer, slightly off to the left. There was a shape near it. Low. I stood there for longer than I should have, before I started walking over. He was crouched beside the car, toward the back, near the hitch where the trailer connected, but he was beside the car, not the trailer. He had a flashlight in his mouth, so both his hands were free. I couldn't see exactly what his hands were doing, because he was facing away from me. He had the gloves on. I said something. I don't remember exactly what. Something like hey, or something like what are you doing? One of those. Whatever it was. He didn't react the way a person reacts when they're surprised. He stood up. Not fast. Just stood up normally. The way you stand up when you've been crouching for a while. He took the flashlight out of his mouth and held it down at his side. He brushed his knees with the gloved hand that wasn't holding the flashlight. There was dirt on his knees, pale dirt, like he'd been kneeling on the ground. I looked at the car. I couldn't see anything obviously wrong with it in the dark. He said something. He asked why we changed our route after leaving Prescott. He used the word route. Not road, not way. Route. And he said after leaving Prescott. I stood there. I know I said something back. I don't remember what. I was trying to figure out what he meant by route, because we hadn't changed our route. We'd driven from Prescott to Ash Fork on the 89, like I'd planned, and then took 18 out to the campground. There was no changed route. I would have remembered if we'd changed the route, because my wife had the directions on her phone, and I would have heard about it. He didn't say anything else. He nodded, the same nod he'd been doing when we made eye contact during the day, and he walked back toward his site. I stood by the car. I checked the tires I could see. They looked fine. I walked around and checked the other two. Fine. I looked at the trailer hitch. It looked like it always looked. I don't know what I was checking for exactly. I went back inside and my wife was asleep. I lay down. I was looking at the ceiling of the trailer in the dark for a long time. In the morning his Tacoma was gone. He'd left before we were up. I walked over to his site. The fire ring was cold, clean, like he'd scattered whatever was in it. There were 2 parallel marks in the dirt where his tires had been. There was a small rectangle of flattened yellow grass where his chair had sat. That was all. We broke camp that morning and drove home. My wife asked why we were leaving early, and I said I was tired and wanted to sleep in our own bed. She didn't push on it. She was tired too. Our son was born 6 weeks later. Normal delivery, nothing wrong. I pulled up the campground online when I got home that day, not later, that same afternoon while my wife was napping. There was no register of who camped there. It wasn't that kind of place. There was no way to look up who had been there or when. I thought about calling the county sheriff's office. I tried to think about what I would say. A man was crouched by my car in the dark with a flashlight. He asked me a question about my drive. He was wearing gloves. None of it was a crime as I understood it, and I didn't have a plate number because it hadn't occurred to me to look. I don't know why he was at the car. I don't know what he was looking at or for. I don't know how he knew we'd been in Prescott. I've thought about whether we were followed from Prescott, and I don't know how I would have noticed if we were. I didn't check. I wasn't looking for that. I've driven that stretch of 89 a few times since then on other trips, and I always look at the turnoff for County Road 18 when I pass it. I don't know what I'm expecting to see. There's nothing to see. It's just the road. Marlene rented the site. I just went because she hated driving at night, and it was a 4-hour drive up from Duluth. Marlene was someone I'd been seeing since that summer. She was a birder, serious about it, not hobbyist serious, but the kind where she had spreadsheets and a dedicated camera bag, and she'd taken 2 weeks off work the previous fall to do the same thing, just at a different location along the same trail. She'd been planning this trip for months. The Superior Hiking Trail in October, because that's when the raptors moved through, hawks and eagles following the ridge south, and she wanted to photograph them. She asked if I wanted to come, and I said yes. And the reason I said yes was mostly the driving thing, but also I didn't have anything else going on that weekend. We set up camp on a Friday evening. The site was about a mile off the nearest access road. Marlene had a system for camp setup, and I just followed instructions and didn't interfere with it. By dark we had the tent up and a fire going, and she had already identified 3 species she hadn't photographed in that county before. She was happy. She had this habit of whispering when she was happy, like she didn't want to disturb whatever was around her. Even when she was talking to me, just the 2 of us sitting at the fire, she kept her voice low. She did that the whole trip, whispered constantly. I got used to it pretty fast. She also had this thing she did with her cheek, chewing the inside of it when she was adjusting the camera. I don't know why I'm telling you that, except that I noticed it a lot that weekend, because she was always adjusting the camera, always working the lens, and the cheek thing happened every time. I kept noticing it and then looking away. Saturday it rained until about 2 in the afternoon, and then the temperature dropped and the rain turned to snow, very light, just a dusting, barely enough to cover the ground. Marlene was out in it the whole time. I stayed in the tent and read. Around 3 o'clock, I came out to get some water, and that's when I saw them. They were behind the tent. Between the back of the tent and the tree line, maybe 30 feet of open ground, and the tracks went straight across it in a line. 4 of them. Just 4. Spaced out. I stood there and looked at them for a while. I want to be clear about what they looked like because this is the part that's hard to explain. They weren't paw prints. There were no claw marks, no pad shapes. They weren't hoof prints either, nothing that pointed or split. They were roughly oval. Each one was about the length of my forearm from wrist to elbow. They had sunk pretty deep into the snow and the mud underneath, deep enough that the edges of the impressions were clean, which meant whatever made them had weight. And there were only 4. Just 4 in a straight line, evenly spaced, going from the trees on one side of the clearing to the trees on the other. The spacing was what I kept coming back to. They were about 4.5 feet apart, maybe closer to 5. I paced it out. I am 5'10", and my natural walking stride is somewhere around 2.5 feet, and I've been told I have a long stride for my height. Whatever made these tracks had a stride almost twice that. And the line was straight. Not a meandering path, not a curve. Straight across. Marlene came back around 4, and I showed her. She got excited, which was her default response to anything she hadn't seen before. She got the camera out and took pictures from multiple angles, and then got a ruler from her bag. She carried a collapsible one for scale and photographs, and laid it next to each impression and photographed that too. She said she wasn't sure what made them. She said it in the way she said most things, quietly, like she was just noting a fact. She didn't seem worried about it. I asked her if there were bears in that area, and she said yes, but these weren't bear prints. I asked what else it could be, and she said she didn't know yet. We ate dinner and talked about other things, and I mostly stopped thinking about the tracks. The snow had started to melt by then anyway, and by morning they'd probably be gone. But then around 5 o'clock, before dinner, I was getting wood from the pile we'd stacked near the fire pit, and I saw more of them. Same shape. Same depth. Going around the outside edge of the fire pit area, just past where we'd laid out the camp chairs. I hadn't heard anything. I'd been maybe 20 feet away, inside the tent, for the previous hour and a half. Marlene had been in the tree line on the other side of camp. Neither of us had heard movement. No branches. Nothing. I got Marlene and showed her, and she photographed these too. There were 6 this time, and they curved slightly, which the first set hadn't. Like whatever made them had gone around the fire pit, rather than straight through the clearing. I looked at the ground between the tracks. Between each impression the ground was undisturbed. The leaf litter was still in place. There was no drag, no scuff, nothing to suggest the thing had shuffled or crouched or done anything except place each foot down with its full weight, and then lift it completely before the next step. We had dinner. Marlene went back out with the camera after we ate, and I cleaned up and stoked the fire. It was maybe 7 o'clock and already fully dark. The fog came in around then. It came off the ridge and moved through the trees, and it got thick fast, and the air had a smell to it, like metal, like if you've ever held change in your hand for a long time and then smelled your palm. It was like that. I noticed it and didn't say anything, and then Marlene came back and she noticed it too. I could tell because she stopped walking when she came into the clearing and stood still for a moment before she came over to the fire. We sat there, and I don't remember what we talked about. Maybe nothing. Marlene was looking at the photos on her camera screen, and then something started moving up on the ridge above us. It wasn't fast. That's the thing I want to be clear about. It was slow and deliberate. You could hear it moving through the brush, the sound of something pushing through undergrowth, and it would go for a little while, and then stop, and then start again. It did that for maybe 20 minutes. I tracked it by sound. It was moving along the ridge parallel to us, more or less, but not coming down toward us. Just moving along up there in the dark and the fog. Then it stopped. Not gradually, not winding down. Just stopped. Marlene had her camera up by then, pointed toward the ridge. She'd put it on the tripod and was looking through the viewfinder. I couldn't see anything up there, just fog and the shapes of trees. I sat with the fire between me and the ridge and waited. She stood there at the tripod for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. I didn't ask her anything because she gets focused when she's shooting and doesn't like to be interrupted. I just sat there. Then she lowered the camera from her face. Not quickly, just slowly brought it down. And she reached out and folded the tripod legs in, one at a time, until the whole thing was collapsed. She did it carefully. She didn't look away from the tree line the whole time she was doing it. And then she asked me, still looking at the trees, whether people's knees could bend backward. I said what? She didn't repeat it. She just kept looking at the trees. I looked at the trees and I couldn't see anything. The fog was too thick and it was too dark past the fire's reach. I looked for a long time and there was nothing I could make out. Just trees and fog and dark. She picked up the tripod and went into the tent and zipped it shut behind her. I sat at the fire for another hour and a half. Nothing moved on the ridge. Nothing moved in the trees. I kept the fire going and watched the tree line and nothing happened. In the morning we packed up. Marlene didn't say anything about leaving early, and I didn't either. We just both started packing without discussing it, and by 8 o'clock we had the car loaded. Marlene drove the whole way back, which she never does. I asked her once on the drive home what she meant, the thing she'd asked about knees. She said she wasn't sure what she saw, and she didn't want to say something definitive when she wasn't sure. She said it the same way she said everything, quiet, even. I didn't push it. She still has those photos on her camera. She never showed them to me, and I never asked to see them. We stopped seeing each other the following February, not because of anything specific, just the way those things go. I've looked up the trail records since then, the camping logs, any reports from around that area in October 2018, and there's nothing. No reports of unusual animal activity. The Superior Hiking Trail is pretty well monitored, and there are birder communities that document that whole corridor obsessively, and I found nothing that matched what I saw or what Marlene might have photographed. I've thought about the stride length a lot. I've looked up every large animal native to northern Minnesota that could account for prints that size and that spacing. Moose, bear, wolf, mountain lion, though mountain lions aren't established in that area. I've looked at gait patterns. The straight line track with that stride length doesn't match any of them that I can find. Moose have a stride around 3 to 3.5 feet, and their prints are obviously cloven. Black bear tracks are distinctive enough that I think I would have recognized them, even if I'm not an expert. I don't know what the metallic smell was. I've never smelled that in the woods before or since. Marlene knew the regional wildlife better than almost anyone I've met. She'd been going out into that corridor for years. She would have recognized a moose or a bear or anything else that belongs there. She would have said so. She would have been excited in a different way, a knowing way, and she would have told me exactly what it was and taken 40 more pictures. She didn't do any of that. She folded up the tripod and went inside. That's all I can tell you. That's the whole thing. I lost my apartment in Tacoma in March of 2021, and for a while after that I was sleeping in my car. A Hyundai hatchback, the older kind, the ones that are basically just a box on wheels. I had the back seat folded down, and a sleeping bag, and a plastic bin with food in it, and that was it. That was what I had going for a few months. The way it worked, I would move around. State campgrounds mostly, because if you paid cash at the self-pay station, and you left before 8 in the morning, nobody really tracked you. Nobody was going to cross-reference anything. You paid, you stayed, you left. I did that for a while, and it was fine. It was a system. Okay, so, the night I'm talking about, there was a job interview the next morning. Warehouse work, nothing special, but it paid enough that I had spent 2 days figuring out which campground to stay at the night before so I would not be late. There was this place, I don't want to say exactly where, but it was behind an old marina. The marina had been closed a while, you could tell, because the gate across the boat launch had rust on it and the lot was cracked up with weeds. The campground was technically separate from it, just on the same road. I had driven past the marina to get there. I picked it because the rate was something like $12 and I had $32 until I got paid from the temp thing I had been doing, and $12 was cheap enough that I could eat the next day too. That was the whole reason. $12 and it was close to the warehouse. When I pulled in it was maybe 9:30. The pay station had duct tape on it, over part of the screen. Half the electrical hookups in the RV section were clearly broken. I was in the tent sites on the east end, the cheaper ones, so none of that mattered to me. I just needed a flat place to park that was legal. There were 2 other occupied sites. One was a family. SUV, bikes on a rack on the back. A kid's helmet zip-tied to one of the handlebars. They had a lantern going, and I could see someone moving around in the site, but I didn't go over, and I don't think they noticed me come in. The other occupied site was farther down, near the tree line on the north side. A group of men, I don't know how many, somewhere between 4 and 6, sitting around one of those metal fire barrel things. Not a campfire, one of those punched-out barrel drums. They had camp chairs around it. I saw that when I drove past their site to get to mine. I parked, I ate crackers, I looked at job listings on my phone until the battery died. I had a charger, but it was slow, and I figured I'd let it charge overnight and have enough in the morning. I moved to the back, got into the sleeping bag, and that was it. I'm going to say it was after midnight when the headlights came. I know it was after midnight because I had checked my phone at some point around 11:30. Still had a little battery then, and it had been at least a half hour after that, maybe more, when I woke up to the lights. 3 flashes, quick, through the windshield. Then nothing. My first thought was park security doing rounds. That happened sometimes. You'd see the lights, they'd slow down, they'd see the cash envelope in the pay tube and keep going. I didn't sit up. I just laid there and waited for whatever it was to pass. Then someone knocked on the rear glass. Once. Not hard. Just one knock, that kind where you use one knuckle and it's controlled. Not someone who lost their kid, not someone panicked. Just a knock like someone knocking on an office door. I sat up. I didn't open anything. I looked through the rear glass, and I could see the shape of someone standing there, but it was dark and the glass is not great. A man. That's all I could tell. He said something. He asked quietly if I was the replacement. Something like that. Those words or close to them. He wasn't yelling. He was talking at a regular volume, like he expected me to hear him through the glass, and I did. I hadn't said anything back yet. I was still trying to understand what he was asking, when someone else shouted from farther down the campground. I can't tell you what they said, because I don't know. It wasn't words I caught, just a voice cutting through, and then the sound of it bouncing off the trees, and then just chaos, immediately like a switch. Footsteps on gravel running. More than one person. Car doors slamming, not like someone getting in their car normally, but fast, hard, like they were done talking about it. Engines turning over and not warming up, just immediately going. The man who had been standing at my rear glass was gone. I don't know when he moved. He was there, and then he wasn't. I got to my knees in the back and looked out through the side window. One of the men from the fire barrel site came running past my car. He was close enough to the car that I could hear his feet on the gravel. He was carrying something. I had some light from whatever was going on down the road. Someone had headlights on and pointed at an angle, and I could see enough to see that what he was carrying was long-handled and had a curved jaw at one end. Bolt cutters, I'm pretty sure bolt cutters. Then the shots. I don't know how many. I know I heard at least 2. They came from the direction of the marina. Not the campground, down past where the gate was. It's a specific sound, and it doesn't sound like TV. It's sharper and shorter than TV. And when I heard it, my hands were on the back window frame, and I stayed very still. Then the driver's side door handle. Someone grabbed it hard enough that the whole car moved. Not just a rattle, the car actually shifted on its wheels a little. Like someone was pulling toward them with their whole weight. The door was locked. I know it was locked because I always locked the doors when I was sleeping. Every night. I checked every night before I got into the sleeping bag. It was the one thing I was consistent about. I was in the back. The front was empty. I stayed where I was. There was more noise from outside, the kind where you can tell people are moving around in the dark, but you can't see them. Voices but not words, not aimed at me. Then tires, someone leaving fast, and then someone else leaving, and then it got quieter. It didn't go silent. There were still sounds, but the sounds changed. The running stopped. The engines kept going in the distance for a while, and then faded. I stayed in the back of the car for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough that my knees were hurting from kneeling on the hatch floor. I moved eventually to sit with my back against the rear seats and my feet toward the hatch glass, and I just sat like that. At some point I realized the family in the SUV was gone. I don't know when they left. I don't know if they left before or after the shots, or right when the noise started. I just noticed at some point that there was no lantern anymore, and the bikes were gone. There were no other cars in the campground. I couldn't see the fire barrel from my spot, but I could see enough of that end of the campground that I could tell there were no vehicles there. I didn't call anyone. My phone was dead by then, I mean completely. Even the slow charging hadn't been enough. I just sat. When it got light enough outside that I could see clearly through all the windows, I got into the front seat, and I started the car. I sat there for a minute with it running, and then I left. I didn't go to the interview. I drove to a gas station about 15 miles away, and I went inside, and I stood by the coffee station for a while. I bought coffee, and I sat in the parking lot, and I drank it. I never figured out what I had been asked. Whether the replacement meant a person or something else. Whether the man who knocked on my window was looking for someone who was supposed to be parked in my spot, and I was wrong, or whether I was just there and he was covering, checking, I don't know. I don't know what was happening at the marina or what the bolt cutters were for, or who fired those shots. I've thought about it a lot, and I don't have anything. There are a few different things it could have been, and I don't have a way to narrow it down. I went back to the area one time, a couple months later, just drove past. The campground was closed. There was a chain across the entrance with a county sign on it. The marina was the same rust on the gate. Nothing changed that I could see. I didn't stop. I just drove past. I got a different warehouse job a week after that night. Different company, not the one I was going to interview for. I got an apartment in August. I still have the hatchback. The rear glass still rattles a little in the frame. It always did. It wasn't from the knock. I don't think it was from the knock. I don't know what else to say about it.